On a freezing November night in 1581, the dark corridors of the Kremlin echoed with agonizing screams. A tall man with a long beard and bloodshot eyes frantically swung an ornate iron staff, roaring like a wounded animal. At his feet lay a young man with a fractured skull and blood streaming down his already pale face. This wasn't an ordinary murder. The attacker was Tsar Ivan IV of Russia, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, and the victim lying at his feet was his own firstborn son, an heir to the Russian throne. "I've killed my son. I've killed my own blood," the monarch screamed, clutching the still warm body of the prince. The courtiers, who witnessed the scene, stood frozen against the walls, terrified they might be the next targets of the Tsar's rage. No one dared to approach, as the man who had conquered entire kingdoms and annihilated cities sobbed like a child over the corpse he had just created. This act of savage parricide wasn't an isolated moment of madness. It was the brutal climax of a life marked by pathological violence, deepening paranoia, and calculated cruelty. As the first ruler to officially adopt the title of Tsar derived from Caesar, Ivan transformed medieval Russia into a feared empire. But at what cost? As a traumatized child, he became a monster who would terrorize not only his enemies, but his own family, and eventually himself. Ivan's bloody path began, ironically, amid blood. Born on August 25, 1530, he was the son of Grand Prince Vasily III of Moscow and his second wife, Elena Glenskaya. Chronicles described his birth as especially painful, with Elena screaming for hours while Kremlin monks chanted prayers to ward off the demons said to be obstructing the delivery. From his first breath, violence and betrayal were Ivan's constant companion. At just 3 years old, Ivan lost his father to a gangrenous infection. Desperate court doctors applied poultices made from servant flesh onto the open wounds, forcing young Ivan to witness his father's agonizing cries. On his deathbed, Vasily appointed a council of boyars, the Russian nobility, to rule during Ivan's minority, while also naming Elena as the main regent. For 5 years, Ivan's mother maintained fragile control, constantly fending off conspiracies. The young prince often saw her tense, surrounded by guards, whispering with advisors about looming threats. When Ivan turned 8, Elena was found dead in her chambers, her body twisted, her mouth stained black, almost certainly poisoned by one of the nobles she had tried to control. What followed was a horror show for the orphaned heir. The boyars, now unchecked, turned Ivan into a pawn in their power games. Two main factions, the Schwiskis and the Belskis, fought to control the child and, by extension, Russia itself. By day, Ivan was forced to watch those meant to protect him openly fight for dominance and plunder the royal treasury. At night, he was neglected, sometimes left hungry as punishment for trivial misbehavior. A disturbing account from that time comes from Ivan himself. Years later, he wrote how boyars would enter his room at night, ignoring the terrified boy while discussing state matters, as if he didn't exist. "My brother Yuri and I were treated like beggars' sons," he wrote in a letter to Prince Kirbsky. "We had no proper clothing or food, while those sworn to protect us wore gold-embroidered robes and dined from silver plates stolen from my father's treasury." Worse than the neglect was the double standard. In public, Ivan was treated with the reverence due a future Tsar, dressed in ceremonial robes too heavy for his frail body. Forced to stand still for hours while foreign diplomats and Orthodox clergy paid homage. In private, he was abused and humiliated, beaten for spilling food or speaking during prayers. This hypocrisy taught Ivan two deadly lessons: that power was the only shield against cruelty, and that appearances of piety often masked deep betrayal. Though extremely intelligent and a voracious reader of theology and literature, he would later boast of knowing the Bible by heart. Ivan lacked consistent moral guidance. Instead, he found pleasure in growing acts of cruelty. At 12, he threw animals off the Kremlin walls, watching with morbid fascination as they splattered on the stones below. Dogs and cats were just the beginning. Soon, he moved on to larger creatures, studying the different sounds they made as they died. Ivan's first public outburst came in early adolescence during a heated council meeting in the Kremlin's Grand Hall. Beneath walls lined with religious icons, he suddenly stood up, his face twisted in rage. You betrayed my father, you betrayed my mother, and now you conspire against me, your sovereign, anointed by God," Ivan roared, pointing directly at Prince Andrei Shuisky, one of the most arrogant and dismissive nobles. The guards hesitated, shocked by the command from the young prince, but soon they seized Shuisky, who pleaded his innocence as he was dragged outside. There, to the horror of all, he was thrown into a pit where starving dogs, kept hungry for this very moment, tore him apart. Ivan watched coldly from a balcony, sipping mead from a gold goblet. This was no impulsive act. It was a calculated message. The time for manipulation was over. Ivan would no longer be a puppet. He turned to the terrified nobles and declared with chilling calm, "So it shall be for all who defy the will of God's anointed sovereign." In January 1547, at just 16, Ivan crowned himself Tsar of all the Russias in a lavish ceremony at the Cathedral of the Dormition in Moscow. Breaking tradition, he didn't wait for the Metropolitan to place the crown on his head. Instead, he crowned himself, signaling that his power came directly from God. The early years of Ivan's rule surprised many, influenced by advisors like the priest Sylvester, nobleman Alexei Adashev, and his beloved wife Anastasia Romanova. Ivan launched major reforms, establishing Russia's first representative assembly, reforming the army, codifying laws, and even founding the first printing press. Deeply religious, Ivan participated in long liturgies, made pilgrimages on foot, and engaged in theological debates. This duality, the pious reformer and brutal tyrant, would define his legacy. Ivan's marriage to Anastasia in 1547 seemed to provide the emotional stability he lacked. Genuinely affectionate, she calmed his violent impulses. They had 6 children, but only 2 survived infancy, Ivan Ivanovich and Fyodor. This fragile peace ended in 1553 when a catastrophic fire destroyed much of Moscow. An angry mob incited by boyars blamed Ivan's maternal relatives, the Glinskys. His uncle, Yuri Glinsky, was lynched on the cathedral steps. This triggered a spiritual crisis. Ivan withdrew, convinced the fire was divine punishment. The turning point came in 1560 when Anastasia died. Ivan was certain she'd been poisoned by boyars, jealous of her influence. He ordered her doctors tortured until they confessed. "They stole my angel," he sobbed, "my only light in this world of demons." Modern historians believe she died of natural causes, possibly tuberculosis, but Ivan's paranoia deepened. When he returned from mourning, his eyes had changed. Always watchful, he now searched every face for betrayal. In 1565, Ivan launched his most terrifying creation, the Oprichnina. He split Russia in 2. Most remained under traditional rule, but a large section, including Moscow, fell under Ivan's direct control, enforced by a personal army called the Oprichniki. Dressed in black, riding black horses, they wore severed dog heads and brooms, symbols of sniffing out treason and sweeping away enemies. Recruited from lower classes, they harbored hatred toward nobles and became loyal instruments of Ivan's terror. The Oprichnikis' atrocities were horrifying. Entire families were executed. Torture methods grew more elaborate, tearing bodies apart with carriages, peeling skin strip by strip while victims stayed conscious. Ivan often forced nobles to dine while their loved ones were tortured nearby. After one execution, Ivan dipped his finger into the victim's hot blood and licked it. "The blood of traitors is sweeter than honey," he said. The height of the terror came in 1570 with the massacre of Novgorod. Deceived by a forged document claiming Novgorod planned to ally with Poland, Ivan vowed to purge the city. For 6 weeks, up to 3,000 people were tortured and killed daily. Victims were impaled, drowned, or burned. Priests were grilled alive. Nuns were gang-raped before being drowned. When it ended, fewer than 10,000 of the city's 40,000 residents remained. Novgorod's trade never recovered. Moscow's dominance was secured. Ivan's personal life mirrored the chaos. After Anastasia's death, he married 6 more times. 3 wives died mysteriously. One was drowned the day after their wedding, another was buried alive. By the late 1576, Ivan's body was deformed from years of gluttony and lust. He suffered from chronic pain, likely syphilis and mercury poisoning from his medication. Then came the act that sealed his historical infamy. One November day in 1581, Ivan walked into his son's chambers and found his pregnant daughter-in-law, Elena, in a sheer nightgown. "Whore!" he shouted. "You dishonor the heir to Holy Russia." He beat her savagely, accusing her of adultery and carrying another man's child, kicking her swollen belly. Hearing the screams, his son, Ivan Ivanovich, ran in. "Father, for the love of Christ, stop! She carries your grandson!" Trying to restrain him, the prince crossed a forbidden line, defying the Tsar. Ivan struck him with his iron staff, the same one he used in religious processions. The blow crushed his skull. Realizing what he had done, Ivan dropped the bloodied staff and collapsed over his dying son. "What have I done?" he wailed. For 3 days, doctors tried to save the prince. Ivan refused to eat or sleep, praying and offering riches, but the wound was fatal. On the 4th day, the Tsarevich died in his father's arms. Witnesses said Ivan roamed the Kremlin in rags, muttering, "I killed my son," banging his head against the walls. He aged rapidly, his hair turned completely white, he shook at the slightest noise. In his final years, Ivan's madness worsened. He wandered the palace, whispering his son's name. He lay for days beside the Tsarevich's tomb, refusing food. His outbursts grew more violent. He executed people for minor offenses, dropping a tray, coughing, or not bowing low enough. He even executed the doctors who tried to save his son. His only surviving heir was Fyodor, gentle, devout, but mentally unfit to rule. On March 17, 1584, Ivan died suddenly while playing chess with Boris Godunov. Some say he was poisoned. Others say it was a stroke from years of stress and illness. His bloated, decaying body was dressed in a monk's robe, fulfilling his wish to die as Brother Jonah, the name he secretly used when contemplating monastic life. Ivan the Terrible remains a disturbing study in childhood trauma, absolute power, and unchecked paranoia. The abused boy who vowed never to be a victim became one of history's greatest victimizers, a ruler who believed he was God's anointed and used that belief to justify unthinkable cruelty. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Every week I bring you new stories, heartfelt, gripping, and sometimes deeply haunting. Let each video take you on a journey you'll never forget.